Hello everyone, this is Maurizio Rafona, and welcome to the TSF9 Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is a different format compared to the weekly TSF9 podcast. In the Deep Dive, we'll interview specialists in various areas and ask in-depth questions about their job, the tools they use, the possible career paths, and much more, all to help people interested in such a career figure out how to go about it. In this very first episode, we speak with Peter Haberl. Peter is an Austrian, emigrated to the US many years ago, currently living in Colorado, and a sports psychologist for the last 25 years. He's been a senior member of the American Olympic team, helping athletes at 9 Olympic Games, several of whom became medal winners. With Peter, we'll look into what the role of a sports psychologist is and how to succeed in it. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the first episode of TSF9 new format, the Deep Dive. It's great to have you here on the podcast.
Maurizio, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to speak with you.
Thank you. So, Peter, please give us a bird's eye view of what a sports psychologist does and what made you choose this career path.
What does a sports psychologist do? I think the way I would describe that is I help athletes understand how the mind works so they can work with the mind in competition. And what got me into this is sort of, I started out as a professional ice hockey player. That's about my first career. So I played professional ice hockey in Europe for about 10 years.
Wow.
And while I was doing that, I was went to university, got my university degree in sports science, and sports psychology was part of that curriculum. And I just got super curious about that field. And reflecting on my own performance, what was going on when I played well and when I didn't play well. And so it became obvious to me it has to do with what happens between my ears. So I was really keen on understanding that better. And at the time, the only place to do that from an applied perspective was the US. So as I was coming towards the end of my career as a professional athlete, was the decision what comes next. Do you become a coach, do something totally different? I want to go back to school and study applied sports psychology. What was happening was in the US. So I went to the US and studied sports psychology there, and then basically never left. And coming back to this idea of, understanding how the mind works so you can work with it. Basically, the mind works as a thought and emotion producing factory. And there's a very simple way to sort of demonstrate that, to athletes, but also to leaders, whoever. And so, I'll pull out my stopwatch and I tell my athletes, tell my audience, all right, so when I press start on the stopwatch, your job will be to not have any more thoughts. Simple as that. So I press start and no more thinking. And then the moment the first thought pops into your head, just sort of raise your right hand and it tells me you're done, right? So this is quite effective in a group setting, actually, because, once you do this, once you actually execute this and you press start on the stopwatch, within seconds, the hands go up. And what I'm trying to demonstrate is that we have a lot less control over our thinking and feeling mind than we think we do. So again, coming back to this metaphor as the mind is a thought and emotion producing factory that produces thoughts and feelings all day long. And that factory comes with a built-in thief. And that thief steals something that is very, very precious to my athletes. So I'll ask athletes, hey, what do you think it is that the thief steals that's really precious to you? And almost always athletes will answer confidence. Right, so it's this feeling state. But I then tell them, well, that's actually not correct. The thief steals something that's much more precious than confidence. And what the thief potentially steals is attention. So the ability to focus, the ability to be present. So it's my job to help athletes be aware of when that thief steals attention and then to regain their attention and focus on the moment and be fully present, because when they do that, they actually give themselves the best chance to compete to their potential.
That makes a lot of sense. And I sense it's a very specialized field. And so would you be able to give us an overview. What are the characteristics or talents or interests that people who may be looking at a career as a sports psychologist would need to have to be successful in it?
Yes, correct. It's a super specialized field. And this was maybe about 15 years ago. I was sitting in the locker room with some of the coaches, the team that I worked with. And one of the assistant coaches had an 8-year-old son, and the son was in the room. And after a while, the son goes, "Peter, what is it you do?" So being a psychologist, I answered a question with a question. So I asked him, "Well, what does it look like to you that I do?" And he paused for a moment and he thought, and then he said, "Well, you stand around a lot, you never say anything, and you look really smart." I said, "Oh yeah, that's pretty good. That's kind of what I do." So what I'm trying to get at with that joke is sometimes it looks like in sports psychology that you do stand around a lot and you don't say a whole lot because first and foremost, you get paid to listen, right? To provide a listening ear to the athletes, to the coaches. So it's helpful to be good at listening. Sometimes that comes easier when you're an introvert. But also when you're introverted, that can be sort of a drawback. Some feedback I got early on in my career is that, well, you're always so quiet, you're always analyzing us. People would project things onto you, and we never say anything. Then you're being viewed as being too analytical, so that can't be helpful either. So you can be extroverted, you can be introverted. It really doesn't matter, but you want to be a really good listener. I think you want to be curious about human beings. I think you want to be curious about performance, and have an appreciation for the beauty of performance when it really comes together. For me, watching athletes perform at their best is a bit like going to a museum and seeing a great piece of art. So it can be really awe-inspiring, right? What the human spirit is capable of, so to speak. So to have an appreciation for that, and a curiosity for what it means to perform under pressure. So I think those would be the main characteristics that you want to have as a sports psychologist.
Got it. And give us a glimpse on what your typical day, week, or month could be like, and where do you spend most of your time, and how's that changed over the years?
It depends a bit whether I am on the road with one of my sports, so whether I'm on tour or not, or whether I'm working for the home office. So when I'm on the road, when I'm going to a competition with particularly one of my team sports, then the way a day looks like is sort of part of the fabric of the team. You'll go to their practice sessions, you'll be there for competitions, you'll have some meetings with individual athletes, you probably have some team sessions, you do some mindfulness practice sessions, you have some conversations with the coaching staff, and you sort of seamlessly flow into the experience of the team. When I'm at home during the week, what I'll do is I'll have individual athletes appointments, and those pretty much all happen over Zoom these days. I'll also put a training plan together for my team sports that sometimes actually the coach executes on the ground. I'll usually have about an hour-long session with the team during the week. There will be a session with the leadership group where we just work on leadership. And then there are the individual athlete sessions that I have where we again work on their mental skills, debrief their performance, get ready for the next competition. And there's always quite a bit of time just preparing for what's to come, collecting stories and putting presentations together and so forth. That's kind of what a week looks like when I'm not on the road. So to you, the last part of the question, how has it evolved over the years? It has evolved more towards the sport of sports psychology and a bit more away from the psychology. And what I mean by that is more this active training of the mind. So rather than, an athlete comes in once a month and we have a chat, that's part of it. But actually what we want to go to is for the athlete to daily practice their mental skills. So it has evolved to more of a sort of coaching aspect of it and actively training the mind.
The impact of sports psychologists on an athlete's performance can be enormous. I mean, we even seen it shown in the last season of Ted Lasso, I think, where they brought in a sports psychologist and the team sort of turned it around. But I do think it's a little bit difficult to quantify and even possibly even realize that behind that athlete's performance, there was some great support from a specialist psychologist. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that's partly a bit of a philosophical question, right? And one of my colleagues, Rich Gordine, he has this great line: is don't be on the jumbotron. So this idea as a sports psychologist, you work in the background, you work as part of a team, and the performance the highest level is almost always a team process. But in the end, it's the athlete and the teams that actually out in the field that perform. So whatever credit happens goes to them. And we're just sort of fortunate enough to make a contribution to that. But it's not us out there on the field actually doing the work. We're just a piece of the puzzle of a very complex puzzle. But it's super fun to be part of that puzzle.
I'm sure over the years you've had many success stories and many situations where you're very proud of the work you've done. But is there perhaps a particularly impactful success story that you could share about your role as a sports psychologist that has actually made a significant difference in an athlete's career or even perhaps personal life?
Yeah, well, two things. First, like one of the things is we sort of stay away from publicly discussing the work we do with an individual athlete, right, or with a team per se, because again, it sort of takes the limelight away from the performance of the athlete. But I can share an example that might be of interest to your listeners, particularly I think from a leadership perspective, because I actually have the coach's permission to share this story. And this was in 2012 at the London Olympic Games, working with women's water polo with the US team. And the team had never won a gold medal. So the sport had started at the Olympic Games in 2000. The team finished second. In 2004, they finished third. 2008, they finished second again. Then a new coach came on board, Adam Krikorian. So I took the team over and led them into the 2012 Games. And then in the semifinal game against Australia, the game sort of went back and forth. And then it was like 9-8 at the end of the game. And with 12 seconds to go, the referee called a penalty on the US team. So now it's 6-5, right? So it's a good chance to tie the game. And as the clock ticks down, Australia takes a shot attempt. There's a scramble in the water for the ball, and Adam calls a timeout with 1 second to go. So you're 1 second away from advancing to the gold medal game, right? The big goal. And we had athletes on the team who had been through the last 3 quads. So we had athletes who had gotten to 3 Olympic Games and never won the big prize, so to speak, right? So there was some confusion in the pool because the referees didn't decide right away what was going on with this 1 second on the clock, right? Because as a player, you think, oh, we got it now. We know they're not going to score. We're going to advance to the gold medal game. The referees had a conversation with each other and with what's called the FINA delegates. And then the referee decides to award a 5-meter penalty shot to the Australians.
Wow.
With 1 second to go. And in water polo, a penalty shot 9 out of 10 times the player will score. And sure enough, the Australian player scores. And now you were, 1 second away from the gold medal game, and now it's tied. So now you got to go into overtime. So Adam basically made a mistake as a leader, right? Because you can't call a timeout unless you have the ball. And the referees decided the US wasn't in possession of the ball when he called that timeout. So here you are, at the most important time in your career as a leader, and you just screwed up basically. So this comes back to this idea, right? Understanding how the mind works. So how does the mind work right now? Well, there's going to be an explosion of thoughts and feelings, right? One of the reporters was going to write the biggest blunder in Olympic coaching history.
Oh my gosh. So
that's not exactly the tagline you want on your tombstone, right?
That's right.
The guy that made the biggest blunder in Olympic coaching history. So Adam called in the team real quick, right? So there's about a 5-minute time period between the end of the game and then when you start overtime. So 6 minutes of overtime, 2 3-minute halves. So he calls me in quickly, says a few things and then sends it back out again. And then it dawns on him kind of what's going on with him, right? And he talked about this in the media afterwards, that he had a lot of those F thoughts in your head. I just screwed up my team. I just made a terrible mistake, right? So becoming aware of that storm of emotions, and then aware of, hey, there is still time here in this time between the start of overtime. So he brought him back in, and then said to the team, now as he sort of gathered himself, became aware of what was on his mind, this is my mistake. So this is my bad. So he owns the mistake, right? And then he says, just because your coach made a mistake doesn't mean we're going to lose this game. And then he comes back to the, sort of technical and tactical instructions that you want to give as a coach, right? So what's so striking about that example, again, is there's going to be an explosion of thoughts and feelings, right? From a leadership perspective. I want to be self-aware of that explosion of thoughts and feelings. I want to be aware of they can hijack my attention. Where does attention needs to be? Well, it actually needs to be in the present moment. It needs to be on the team, right? It needs to be on making a connection with your athletes. It needs to be on also giving them instructions on what to focus on their part. And on the athlete side of things, obviously, same thing. You want to be aware of the emotions. Just wouldn't be surprising if you're sort of mad at your coach for having made that mistake, right? Mad having to go another 6 minutes now with the uncertainty and the momentum shifting over to the other team, to the Australians, right? And then again, the task is, can you come back to the present moment, focus on what's ahead of you, and bring the right intensity for those final 6 minutes. And it was just really fun actually to read their comments again in their media comments after the games. There's just things like, hey, it's 6 more minutes. We've had adversity before, let's just go play. Or stuff like, well, you just refocus on the next play, right? Which is exactly what they did. They won their overtime, and so the game ended 11-9. And then they went on and win the gold medal. And then they went on to win 2 more gold medals actually next to the games as well. So the coach, the leader, was really transformative, right? But it's been so much fun over the last 15 years of working with Adam, just his openness to incorporate sports psychology into the work of the team and doing a lot of mindfulness practice. But it's not just the team that does the practice, it's also he himself as the leader that does the practice. And that just makes a big difference, I think, in the buy-in from the athletes and stuff. So that was sort of a nice example, I think, where you can sort of connect the practice and the work that we did with that team to then sort of what happened in the pool. And one of the things that was really cool about this story, maybe I can end with that, is when I first met him in the fall of 2008, and I'll never forget it, he talked about the vision that he had for his team. And one of the things he said is he wanted a team that's going to be independent of him in the water, right? They can think for itself, so to speak. And in many ways, that vision came to fruition in that moment when he made that mistake, right? That they could go out and just sort of be themselves and not be rattled by that. So that was sort of a fun experience.
That's an amazing story, and thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you must have been very proud of how he was handled, of course, sports-wise, but mentally by all both the coach and the team. Switching gears a little bit, sports psychologist seems a little bit a single type of career path in a sense, right? I think you start on the job and that's the job you do, but is there a type of career progression in your line of work that people can look forward to?
Yes, I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. One is, it's sort of perhaps similar to the work that you might do or the career progression you have as a coach, right? Where you start on a certain level and then you work your way up to the majors, so to speak, right? Or the big leagues, so to speak. That'd be one way to look at that. And then the other thing is we sort of see more and more, in North America and the collegiate space, professional sports organizations having sort of departments, right? Where at some point in time you can become a department head. And I think then the other specialization is and progression might just be in the level of skills you offer, and what kind of tools you have in your portfolio. So I think there's always room for growth in that area as well. And there are different ways you can specialize and fine tune what you offer, I think.
On that point of specializations, do sports psychologists tend to follow single sports, or there particular careers of focus on, for example, post-injury mental health or youth or any other sort of specific area that after a few years present themselves as opportunities for practitioners to specialize in?
Yes, I think there are various opportunities like that. You can sort of look at sports psychology between these two extremes of mental health on the one side, and then sort of strict sports psychology on the other side, right? And the way I usually explain that is so some folks sort of focus just on the mental health piece, and some folks like myself just on the sports psychology piece. And the way I sort of structure that for myself is picture being a soldier and fighting on the front lines. The battle goes on, but you get shot, you get wounded, and that injury needs to be attended to, and that'll happen back at the field hospital. At the same time, on the front line, the battle goes on, so someone's got to be there and support the troops at the front line, right? So as a sports psychologist, I see myself supporting the troops at the front line. Hence, like I would travel to competitions with sports. But let's say you're working with an athlete who is depressed or has an anxiety disorder or an eating disorder. That athlete wouldn't be on tour with a team, but that athlete needs care back home, and that care most likely is provided by someone who specializes in an area like that. So that would be one way to look at that. Then, to your point, I have a good colleague in Hong Kong, Karen Lowe, who strictly works with youth sports. So it depends a little bit, I think, the population in your area, or you can focus on youth sports. You can also, as you mentioned, you can focus on injury rehabilitation. You might be working in the hospital, where that could be a very useful skill and service that might be available to the population you're in. And then you also have folks like myself who specializes in team sports, which can be different than individual sports. And then on the individual sports, you have the acrobat sports, who are quite different than the combat sport, right? In the combat sport, this idea of going one-on-one against somebody who's literally trying to rip your head off is a little different than, say, you're an acrobatic sport where it's just you out there all by yourself.
You clearly work very closely with other members of the coaching staff. But one curiosity I have is, can you elaborate a little bit on how you work with the other parts of the staff to ensure the athlete's mental and physical well-being? Are you sometimes in a little bit of competition between the different coaching units?
Yes. So on the team sports side, the staff consists of the coaching staff, head coach, assistant coach, video coach. Then you usually have a dietitian with the team, a strength and conditioning coach. You have the medical personnel, the play trainer, the physio, and so forth. So you want everybody to work together as a team and provide the best care for the athletes, right? So that collaboration is obviously hugely important. And really, it's also from a sports psychology perspective, this idea of being a team within a team. And again, can you make a contribution for that team to work effectively? And how do you work together with that group and share the relevant information that needs to be shared, while at the same time maintaining a level of confidentiality and with the athletes as well.
On your LinkedIn page, Peter, you say, I don't care about your feelings, but I care that you notice your feelings. Can you tell us what that means in practice for your work, and particularly when you carry out your role with high-level athletes?
Yes. So when you have a sports psychologist that tells you he doesn't care about your feeling, and that might be a bit off-putting, right?
Yes.
The first reaction might be, wow, this guy must be a first-rate jerk. Why would I want to work with this guy? So the reason I put that out there is that there's a myth in sports psychology, and the myth is that the champions, the great athletes, they're always cool, calm, and collected. They're never nervous. They're always full of confidence. So with that myth then comes the idea that as a sports psychologist, my job is to help athletes be cool, calm, and collected. My job is to help athletes be confident. Totally disagree with that myth. So one thing that, having worked at 9 Olympic Games has taught me now is that in that moment of performance, in that moment of pressure, The athletes actually aren't cool, calm, and collected. And often they aren't confident either. This is a simple equation I offer up. If the outcome means the world to you, and if the outcome is uncertain, guess what emotions will show up? So again, in my arena, Olympic Games, the outcome means the world to the athletes. They might get one shot at it because it comes every 4 years, right? So they might get one chance to win a medal. They've trained years for this opportunity. So it means the world to them. They invested a lot of it into it. The outcome is uncertain. No one knows what's going to happen. No one can predict this part of the fascination of sport and why we all watch. We don't know what's going to happen, right? So the outcome is uncertain. So if those two elements are in place, almost by definition, uncomfortable emotions will show up, right? So yes, anxiety will show up, nerves will show up, pressure will show up, tension will show up. So if then I'm caught in this myth, in this trap of I shouldn't be nervous, I should feel differently, I should feel confident. What's the matter with me for not feeling confident? The great ones, they all feel confident, right? Then I'm going to have a battle with my own mind, and then I'm in trouble, right? And athletes are often caught up in this myth. So I usually offer up some examples, so I'll share this athlete quote. It's the only way to describe it. It feels like the gallows right before the Olympic final, right? So I ask, do you want to feel that way? And the athletes, well, no, I don't want to feel that way. 100%. No one wants to feel that way. Now, who's going to sign up for, I want to feel like I'm about to be hung. No one will sign up for that, right? All right, so you don't want to feel that way. Why do you not want to feel that way? Well, if I feel that way, I perform poorly. Okay, that makes sense, right? Negative emotions equals poor performance. That's the equation that's in the mind of the athletes. All right, so let's see who shared this quote. Well, this is a guy named Chris Hoy. Chris Hoy is a British track cyclist, and Chris Hoy has won 6 gold medals over 3 Olympic Games. Right? In this instant, he described how he felt before his first gold medal race. He was the reigning world champion. At the time, he was competing in an event called a kilo. So it was a 1 kilometer time trial. It's you against the clock. As the reigning world champion, you get to go last, which means you see everybody else's time. 3 of the last 4 guys broke the Olympic record and the world record. So that, it's really fast, right? So you see all that, and then the outcome becomes uncertain, and then it feels like the gallows. So then if you think, okay, I shouldn't be feeling this way, then you're in trouble. If, on the other hand, you can say it's totally normal to feel this way, every athlete feels this way, this is how you prepare to ride the ride of your life, it's a completely different story. And when you do that, that thief that I mentioned in the beginning, that thief won't steal your attention. But if in that moment you think, I got to fix my emotions, then the thief is stealing your attention. Then you're not fully present, right? So this is, again, why I have that line, I don't care how you feel. I do care that you notice how you feel, right? Because once you notice, once you're aware of what's present, then I can use those emotions to my advantage. Because emotions are information, right? That our organism provides that I can utilize. But there are no bad emotions. They're just emotions that show up. Okay. So I want to go away from the form of the emotion, pleasant, unpleasant, comfortable, uncomfortable, positive, negative, and I'll focus on the function of the emotion. So people often think they shouldn't be anxious, for example, right? It's bad to be anxious. I disagree. Anxiety is actually quite functional, because when we're anxious, we can turn that into preparation, right? The anxiety tells me the outcome isn't certain, so I'm going to prepare for this competition. It's quite frequently that athletes, when they're very successful, they get very confident, they're not anxious anymore, and then they actually fail to prepare. So the uncomfortable emotions, the negative emotions, we don't need to push those aside. We want to listen to what they have to say and then use them to our advantage and take effective actions. So this is why I say, I don't care how you feel. but I care that you notice how you feel. And that noticing, we can train that. We can train that ability to notice what's present and then to not have the emotions hijack our attention.
That's extremely insightful, Peter, and reminds me of a fellow countrymate of yours, Arnold Schwarzenegger, that recently had his special up on Netflix. It talked exactly about that, how his lack of anxiety and pressure made him slip and fall behind the rankings for Mr. Olympia. And it's like, no, that cannot happen. And that gave him the extra motivation to go and win the last, I think, his sixth title. So
Yes.
now that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask a fairly open-ended question and maybe a little bit unfair, but what are the most difficult aspects of your job?
I think the most difficult aspect of the job is just the amount of travel that's involved, and just
Right.
when you travel out, obviously you're away from family, and that's not easy on the partner. That's not easy on your kids. So I would say over the years that I would say that's been the most challenging aspect of it, because I think if you want to do this job well, that then almost by definition you have to travel with your sports. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges I would see.
So, Peter, what are some tools they use in your job that may be unique to it? Could it be some specific technology or some old school techniques or approaches? Is there anything particularly interesting that you could share with the listeners?
Yeah, yes, I think certainly an old school approach is just the ability to listen and to be present, to give your athletes the full attention. But some sort of newer technologies I've been experimenting with over the last few years is this idea of what's called social mindfulness. This is an approach that was developed by two Dharma teachers, Vince Horn and Kenneth Folk in the US. And I had the privilege to train with Vince for a few years. And I've sort of applied these techniques to my work in sports psychology, and I found them really applicable and really helpful. So the idea here is, with mindfulness, you usually train by yourself in silence, or you listen to a guided audio session. And in social mindfulness, what you do is you practice together and you practice aloud. And it's been a lot of fun to integrate these techniques into my work, mainly with team sport athletes, but also with individual sport athletes, because again, it offers this opportunity to practice together, right? So practice becomes a social gathering, and then it becomes more motivating as well. Plus, in the social aspect, when you practice out aloud, there's a built-in feedback mechanism, whereas in silent meditation, your mind may wander off for minutes and you don't even notice it. In the social setting, hearing someone else reflect on and share what they're aware of in the moment tends to bring you right back to the moment as well. So it sort of optimizes practice time. So that's one approach that I've recently incorporated into my work that's really been fun to play around with.
And has generally technology made a big impact in your profession? We've seen in the last few years how, for example, technology in sports has just gone through the roof, with coaches monitoring absolutely everything about their athletes on the field and in the gym. And I mean, has it been the same for your profession? And do you see it changing going forward, perhaps?
It hasn't really happened for myself. Perhaps maybe I'm too much of a Luddite in that aspect. Perhaps because I'm keenly aware of just how important the human connection is, particularly in my work, but also in general. There have been I think, some attempts over the years, and someone that might come. For example, neurofeedback, biofeedback has, I think, some interesting technology options that can help with training awareness. There's also some technology out there sort of measuring brain waves sort of in the moment that again potentially can help. But very often they are sort of sold as a magic bullet, and that really doesn't exist in the world of sport. Performance is just too complex. And I think one area that probably will come soon will be virtual reality, and
Right.
seeing how that can be incorporated in the sports psychology work.
Social media and public scrutiny can add tremendous amount of pressure on athletes and their performance and their lives. How do you guide them in managing their online presence and handling criticism or negative comments, which is not strictly something to do on the field, right? But it still could have a big impact.
Yes, the impact can be huge potentially. And it's challenging because nowadays athletes do need to see themselves as a brand, and they have to brand themselves right. And obviously, social media will be the tool to do that. And one thing that I do a lot is I share stories. And the first time that this sort of came to prominence for me was in 2012 at the London Olympic Games, where this Australian athlete, Emily Seeboom was her name. She had the fastest time in her respective discipline in the preliminary heat. So getting ready for the final, right? So she was on social media and everybody told her she's going to win the gold medal and how exciting that would be. So there's sort of a sense of confidence, right? You got this type stuff. And this is again the thief at work, because that can steal your attention, and that will sort of fail to prepare you for the onslaught of emotions. So she gets on the starting block and all of a sudden she's super nervous, because there's a realization, hey, I haven't won anything yet. And that time doesn't matter anymore. And afterwards, again, in a media interview, she says, I didn't get out of social media soon enough. So basically, social media can be a thief, again, that steals attention. So athletes need to prepare for that, and I think be very deliberate in how they work social media around major competitions. And there are different strategies. That there's obviously going on a media fast and withdrawing completely, and then there are other approaches as well, where you're very deliberate in what media you consume and how you work with that media. And as you alluded to, very often some of the comments, particularly after poor performance, can be extremely negative. And I thought that the American skier Michaela Schifrin kind of gave a masterclass in how to utilize social media when the media trolls come after you after a supposedly poor performance. So last year, Schifrin struggled at the games in Beijing, and then was labeled a joker and all that good stuff, right? And the way she worked with that, which again to me is just masterfully done, is she addressed her comments to other athletes. She didn't address the haters. She addressed the folks who get sort of hate messages, and her message was, just carry on. Don't buy into what they have to offer. Take the next step, move forward. And then obviously she beautifully demonstrated that herself by then again winning the overall World Cup after the Olympic Games, and then just having this amazing season last year where she broke the all-time record. Now is truly the best skier in the history of the sport. And then another comment there is, I think one thing that she does really well as well is we noticed from research that there are two types of sort of social media presences. And these are labeled as the me former and the informer. The me former, where it's all about you, you're more likely to actually then fall into a trap. Whereas the informer, where you share helpful information on social media, seems to be a lot more healthy from a psychological perspective. So a good question to ask is, am I a me former? Is it all about me? Or am I an informer in my social media presence?
With the rise of esports and virtual competitions, it's become a huge business. I had no idea that playing video games could be so popular one day. But have you had any opportunity to explore this sector? Or do you have any interest in it? And have you ever come across any athletes that perhaps needed some sports psychology support? I mean, how would that compare, perhaps?
Myself, I have not had any exposure with esport athletes, but I know of colleagues who have, and who have basically specialized in that area of sport. And I can see right away, again, this idea, attention is the currency of performance, right? Those folks, they need to focus. And I'm sure they know something about attention and paying attention and what can distract attention. I think probably one thing to add to that too is they probably would benefit from some physical training as well, as that tends to make us more resilient under pressure, and again protect that valuable currency of attention.
Over the years, Peter, have you seen your profession experience a change of talent that is coming through the ranks? Are people coming from perhaps different fields of expertise?
Yes, I think there's a bit of a cross fertilization. People coming in from business, but it's also a lot more younger people, a lot more diversity. And I think one of the fun aspects is particularly in Major League Baseball, where there's a huge need for bilingual sports psychology providers. So folks who also speak Spanish, because so many of the athletes in Major League Baseball come from a Hispanic background.
Peter, you mentioned that you chose to pursue your career in the US, and it was sort of the place to be for a sports psychologist. Is this still the case? Is the US still the main mark? Is it the US the MBA of sports psychology, or do you see your profession emerging in other parts of the world?
I do see my profession emerging in other parts of the world. So 30 years ago, when I came here, definitely this was the place to be. But like from a research perspective, I think the best research right now is coming out of Europe, coming out of Great Britain, places like that. Not so much the US anymore, really. And then again, just there's been an explosion of the field from a provider perspective across the world. Here in Asia now, in the US for sure, but definitely in Europe, yes, very much so.
This is a bit of a personal question, but I mean, you basically have to listen to a lot of other people's difficulties. But in your job, how do you deal with your own stress and pressure, always having to be there for other people?
Yeah, allow me to rephrase that a little bit. I don't have to
Sure.
listen. I don't have to listen. I'm privileged to listen, and it truly is a privilege to be with someone and sort of allow themselves to be vulnerable and sort of share their life story with what is in essence a stranger like myself, because that's sort of the feeling of trust that emerges there is to me always remarkable and special. So it's not a have to; it's a privilege to listen. And yes, you're correct. That can be obviously stressful, and there's pressure in the job, right? So for me, as much as possible, I try to practice what I preach. Physical exercise for me is hugely important in my own ability to manage stress. Having my own mindfulness practice is very important. And then having colleagues that I can speak to about aspects of the work, I think is also really, really important. So again, I try to practice what I preach, work on understanding my own mind as well, and skillfully work with it.
Peter, one last question, if you don't mind. For a young person looking at this profession of a sports psychologist, thinking about making a jump, what words of advice would you have?
If this is something you're passionate about, and if you're comfortable with uncertainty, by all means, pursue this field. If you're looking for certainty, meaning that you have a guaranteed job at the end of an educational path, perhaps this is not going to be your cup of tea. But if you're comfortable with uncertainty, which, by the way, is also what the athletes need to be comfortable with uncertainty. And if it's something that intrigues you, then by all means, this would be a worthwhile pursuit.
Peter, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This brings our first episode of TSF9's Deep Dive to an end. I hope you've all enjoyed listening to Peter's experience as a sports psychologist and really appreciate your support of this podcast. Stay cool, stay positive.